The old house, draped in twinkling lights and the scent of pine and cinnamon, was, for the first time in 20 years, silent. Not the comforting silence of a winter evening, but a heavy, suffocating quiet, like the air before a lightning strike. My name is Cora, and this is a story not about the magic of Christmas, but about the darkness that can hide beneath the tinsel and the betrayal that can be wrapped in silk ribbon. I want you to listen closely, because this story is a mirror reflecting the hidden corners of family life, the ones we rarely dare to look at. My son David had married Sarah 20 years ago. Sarah, the perfect daughter-in-law. She was calm, soft-spoken, a vision of patience and domestic grace. She was everything I wasn't, or everything I thought David needed. Julian, my husband, adored her. "She's an angel, Cora," he used to say, often right after she'd cleaned up our massive holiday dinner mess, a faint, sweet smile on her lips. They built a beautiful life, a beautiful home, and gave me two wonderful grandchildren. We were the perfect American family, a tableau of warmth and belonging. But you see, every meticulously crafted painting has a brushstroke that doesn't quite fit, a shadow in the corner, and my daughter-in-law Sarah's brushstroke was her hands. Sarah was a talented woman. She managed a small, high-end gallery downtown. She was the one with the quiet taste, the eye for details, the hands that could arrange a bouquet with an artist's precision. Yet, whenever I tried to talk about her gallery work or asked her to help me with a delicate piece of pastry, she would pull back. Her hands, when they were not resting demurely in her lap, were always hidden. They were either tucked into her pockets, gloved on a cold day, or simply clasped tightly together, her fingernails always immaculately filed, a single pale color. I always attributed it to her being shy, elegant, maybe a little pretentious. But not once did I think it was a lie, a cover for a secret. This past Christmas, my granddaughter, little Lily, only 7 years old, decided to make a gift for her mother. It wasn't a store-bought toy, it was a clay sculpture she molded at school. A crude, lumpy little dog with two mismatched eyes. Lily wrapped it herself, a clumsy, thick bandage of colorful paper and Scotch tape. The morning she presented it, Sarah unwrapped it with the same quiet, sweet smile, but her reaction was forced, a subtle, almost imperceptible hesitation. Then, Lily insisted her mother wear the gift. "Mommy, it's a bracelet. You have to wear it now." Lily squealed, trying to tie the thick, misshapen clay loop around Sarah's wrist. Sarah laughed, a light, tinkling sound, and tried to gently refuse. "Oh, honey, it's so beautiful. But you know Grandma Cora's hands are clumsy. I might drop it. I need to keep it safe on the mantel." I was standing right there, holding a tray of my homemade gingerbread cookies. My hands, the hands that had kneaded 1,000 loaves and carried 1,000 worries, the hands that were now wrinkled and bearing the marks of a life well lived, were anything but clumsy. And at that exact moment, the way Sarah held her wrist, the quick, fleeting flash of a panic in her eyes before she masked it with a smile, it hit me. It wasn't about the bracelet being safe. It was about her hands. It was just a flicker, a small, dark ripple in the calm water. But a wife and a mother, a woman who has lived 60 years and seen a little bit of everything, our intuition is a deep, primal knowing. And mine whispered that the angel Sarah had something to hide, a dark past story hidden right beneath the surface of her delicate hands. The seed was planted. And soon, the roots of that bitter truth would start to grow, threatening to crack the foundation of the home David and Sarah had built. I knew I had to find out, not just for David, but for the sake of the truth. That flicker of panic I saw in Sarah's eyes, that quick, unnatural pullback of her wrist when little Lily tried to put that clumsy clay bracelet on her arm. It didn't leave me. It stayed, a nagging whisper in the back of my mind. It poisoned the sweet scent of the gingerbread and muted the happy sound of my grandchildren's laughter. Christmas passed, the lights came down, and the silence returned, heavier this time, burdened by my secret suspicion. I started watching Sarah, not in a confrontational way, but with the quiet, practiced observation of a woman who understands that the truth often hides in the smallest, most ignored details. I noticed she never wore short sleeves, even on warmer days. Her wrists were always covered, either by the long, flowing cuffs of a blouse or by chunky, often mismatched bracelets. It was an aesthetic choice I had always accepted, but now it felt like a deliberate act of concealment. One cold Tuesday afternoon, Sarah and I were moving some old boxes of Julian's wartime relics in the attic. She was wearing a thick woolen sweater. As she strained to lift a heavy wooden chest, the cuff of her sweater slid down, revealing her wrist for a brief, startling moment. And there it was. Not a scratch, not a scar, but a tiny faded tattoo. It was just a small, intricate black design, barely the size of a dime, but it wasn't the kind of elegant, discreet tattoo you see now. It was rougher, older, almost like a faded prison mark. Before I could process what I was seeing, Sarah gasped, not from the effort, but from sudden alarm. She snatched her arm back, pulled the sleeve down with lightning speed, and turned her back to me. "Oh, I'm sorry, Cora. That box is heavier than I thought," she mumbled, her voice strained, avoiding my gaze. I simply nodded, the cool, dusty attic air suddenly feeling very, very hot. I smiled, the perfect placid mother-in-law. "It's all right, dear. Let's leave this one for David." But inside, the dam broke. A tattoo? On Sarah? The soft-spoken, church-going art gallery owner? This clashed violently with the image she had so carefully maintained for 20 years. A dark past story was hiding under her sleeves, an untold truth that was gnawing at the foundations of my family. I couldn't confront her. My gut told me that confronting her now would only lead to a perfectly crafted lie, a denial as sweet and poisonous as her smile. I needed certainty. I needed truth. Later that day, as the setting sun cast long, lonely shadows across my kitchen floor, I picked up the phone. I didn't call Julian, who was too easily fooled by his angel daughter-in-law. I called my trusted friend, Mrs. Miller, the woman who had helped me find a private investigator when I suspected Julian's own affair years ago, the one I dismissed as paranoia, the suspicion that almost cost me my marriage. This time, I wouldn't dismiss it. This time, my intuition, my primal knowing, was screaming. "Mrs. Miller," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I need Thomas's number. It's about Sarah." There was a heavy silence on the line, the same thick, accusatory silence of my house. Mrs. Miller, a woman of few words but profound intuition, didn't ask questions. "I'll send it, Juliet." "Be careful," she replied. An hour later, I was on the phone with Thomas, the private investigator. He was short and stocky, with philosophical eyes that seemed to read everything, to see through the surface of things. "Mrs. Roberts," he said, his voice calm, professional. "What exactly are we looking for?" "I want the truth about my daughter-in-law, Sarah, her past, everything before she met my son, David. I suspect a secret tattoo, a small black mark on her wrist. I need to know what it means, and I need to know why she hides her hands." Thomas paused, the sound of his pen scratching against paper filling the small silence. "It's a peculiar request, but I understand." "Discreetly and reliably, Mrs. Roberts. I'll start digging into her history. Go home and don't do anything to arouse suspicion. The truth always leaves a trail." I hung up, feeling a knot of dread in my stomach, but also a strange sense of resolve. I was about to open a secret chamber I never knew existed in the heart of my family. I was ready to face the truth, whatever it may be. Thomas, the private investigator, was fast and efficient, like a quiet hunter. 3 days after our phone call, an encrypted message arrived on my personal computer. I sat at my kitchen table, the early morning sun casting a deceptively peaceful glow on the mahogany surface, and opened the attachment. It wasn't a long report, but it felt like a hammer blow to the silence of my home. The first line shattered the perfect American family tableau Sarah had so meticulously crafted. Subject's true identity is not Sarah Thompson. The name she had been using for 20 years, the name my son David married, the name of the mother of my grandchildren, was a lie. The report stated that Sarah Thompson legally existed, but my daughter-in-law had acquired that identity only 2 decades prior. Her true birth name was Estelle Dubois. Estelle Dubois. The name sounded sharp, foreign, dangerous, a stark contrast to the soft, comforting vowels of Sarah. The discovery left me trembling not just with anger, but with the cold, profound fear of the unknown. Who was Estelle Dubois, and what was she running from? Why the elaborate deception, maintained for 20 long years, all built around a loving marriage and 2 innocent children? I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to witness the spectacular collapse of my entire life. I continued reading. Thomas found the trail by cross-referencing the faded wrist tattoo. It wasn't a prison mark, as I had grimly suspected, but a logo, the insignia of a high-end, now defunct jewelry and art syndicate in New York, which had collapsed 22 years ago in a blaze of financial scandal and alleged theft. Estelle Dubois had been a minor associate, involved in their distribution and sales network. The scandal was massive, and Estelle had seemingly vanished into thin air right before the indictments fell. She didn't just change her name, Cora, Thomas had written in the accompanying email. She executed a full rebirth, new identity, new state, new life. This woman is a master of deception, a virtuoso of lies. A virtuoso of lies. The phrase echoed in my mind, casting a sinister light on every sweet smile, every quiet nod, every perfectly set dinner table over the last 2 decades. I remembered Sarah's quiet taste, her eye for detail, her management of an art gallery. It wasn't a talent, it was a skill honed in a shady syndicate, an expertise in identifying and moving stolen goods. Her career was not a career, it was a cover. The tattoo was the key. Thomas was certain it was a membership mark. He had included a faded news photo of the syndicate's owner, a notorious figure named Victor, who had the exact same mark on his inner forearm, the same small, intricate black design. My mind raced back to Julian, my husband. He adored Sarah. He trusted her completely. He never questioned anything. But Julian had a quiet, stubborn nature, and he was fiercely protective of his family and our legacy. I knew confronting him with this evidence would not only destroy him, but would likely make him defensive of the woman he loved, the angel who was, in fact, Estelle Dubois. I couldn't just drop this bomb of truth on David either. The evidence was too cold, too much of a shock to his well-ordered world. I needed to find the connection. Why this family? Why David? Thomas's next file was a digitized public record. Sarah Estelle's adopted father, Mr. Thompson, had been a mid-level manager at a regional bank in San Diego, the very place Julian and I had met and started our lives. The bank was small, and it was eventually acquired by a larger entity shortly before Sarah met David. A chilling thought pierced through the haze of my shock. Was it possible that David wasn't the target? What if Julian, with his quiet history in finance, he had worked in risk management for years before retiring, was the original link? Had Estelle been running, or had she been deliberately placing herself in a strategically advantageous position? The beautiful, meticulously crafted lie was not just a shield against her past, it was a carefully laid trap. I realized with a sudden, overwhelming chill that I might be the only one who saw the monster lurking beneath the perfect, sweet smile. I typed a reply to Thomas, my fingers moving with the cold, silent rage that was boiling inside me. Thomas, focus on Victor. Find out if he's still alive. Find out if Sarah is still in contact with the syndicate. And tell me why this family. I had to be careful. I had to continue my practiced role, the calm, unperturbed mother-in-law, even as my world was crashing down. The truth was right here in my hands, a tangible manifestation of my worst fears, and I couldn't let it destroy us until I knew how to fight back. The next few days felt like a performance of a perfectly rehearsed play, and I was the reluctant lead actress. I smiled, I baked, I asked Sarah about David's work, all while my mind raced with the terrible knowledge I now possessed. Estelle Dubois, a small black tattoo, a collapsed art syndicate. Every interaction was now laced with suspicion. Every one of Sarah's sweet gestures felt like a poisonous barb. Then came the second report from Thomas. It was detailed, meticulously researched, and it pulled the thread of the past directly into the heart of my present. The notorious syndicate owner, Victor, was indeed alive. He had served a short sentence, only to vanish quietly into the private finance sector, resurfacing 3 years ago as the head of an offshore investment firm specializing in art acquisition. The pieces started to click into place cold and hard. Thomas had done more than just track Victor. He found a disturbing connection to my husband, Julian. 25 years ago, Julian, before our marriage and his move into risk management, had worked for a small, now defunct regional bank in San Diego, the very bank where Sarah Estelle's adoptive father had been a mid-level manager. That bank was known for handling the early finances and loans for Victor's budding and ultimately criminal syndicate. Mrs. Roberts, Thomas wrote, the trail suggests that Julian Roberts was not a target but a resource. The link is too old, too specific to be a coincidence. Sarah's marriage to your son, David, placed her strategically in your home near Julian. A resource. My Julian. Was he involved in the syndicate's shadowy financial dealings all those years ago? Was this why he had always been so tight-lipped about that job, dismissing it as just bank stuff? The revelation was a dizzying blow. It wasn't about an affair or personal betrayal, it was about a calculated long-term financial plot. The deeper mystery, Thomas explained, revolved around a few priceless, non-indictable pieces of art that had disappeared during the syndicate's collapse. They were small, high-value sculptures, easy to hide, easy to transport, and impossible to track legally once they left the country. The rumor was that they had been successfully laundered and stashed away by a discreet banker in an overseas account for safekeeping, with the key, the access to the account, kept secure in a seemingly innocent location. A shiver ran through me, not from cold, but from a profound, bone-deep fear. Was this why Sarah married David? To gain access to my family? To Julian? Was this why she managed an art gallery? It was all a cover, a strategy, a meticulous, patient plot years in the making. The realization made me feel like an utter fool. I, Cora, the strong, sensible matriarch, had welcomed a venomous snake into my own nest for 20 years. I thought about the missing art, the key to the hidden assets. Where would an old banker hide the key to a small fortune, a secret only known to him and one accomplice? Not in a bank vault, not in a safe deposit box, but somewhere ordinary, somewhere familial. I walked the old house, looking at every antique, every piece of furniture, wedding gifts, heirlooms, relics. I remembered Julian's meticulous nature, his love for history and old objects, his almost obsessive way of preserving things. I went to the attic, back to the heavy wooden chest Sarah and I had strained over just days ago. The one I had quickly dismissed as holding Julian's wartime relics. As the winter sun streamed through the small attic window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, I opened the chest. It wasn't wartime relics. It was full of meticulously organized financial documents from Julian's old San Diego bank days, all neatly labeled. In a small, unassuming mahogany box, tucked beneath a stack of old loan applications, I found it. A tiny, intricately carved wooden bird, a magpie. It looked like a simple, rustic piece, maybe a souvenir, but it felt heavy in my hand. Too heavy for its size. My heart pounded like a thief's, a frantic, guilty beat. I knew, with the same primal certainty that had exposed Sarah's tattoo, that this small, unassuming magpie was the key. Was this the missing art? Or the key to the account that held it? And had Julian known about it all along? I had to find out what the magpie meant, and if Sarah Estelle was now trying to retrieve it. My next call would not be to Thomas, but to an art expert. I needed to understand the value of this small wooden bird. The time for hiding was over. The time for action, the time to turn the trap back on the hunter, had begun. I clutched the small, heavy wooden magpie in my hand. It was smooth and cool against my palm, yet radiated a chilling heat. The heat of 20 years of lies and deceit. This wasn't an ordinary trinket. It felt too purposeful, too securely hidden amongst old banking papers in Julian's chest. My next move had to be precise, discreet, and devastatingly effective. I bypassed Thomas for a brief moment and made a call to an old contact, a woman I knew from my early bakery days in San Diego, who now specialized in appraising unusual art and collectibles. I described the magpie, the specific wood, the minute carving, and the strange metallic weight inside. "Cora," my friend whispered, her voice immediately taking on a serious, professional edge. "That sounds like a decoy magpie. They were very popular in the underground art world decades ago. It's not the art itself, but it holds the cipher. It's a key, likely for an old-style Swiss lockbox or an offshore digital vault. A cipher, a code. Julian hadn't hidden the missing art. He had hidden the key to the missing art, and the decoy magpie was the final piece of the puzzle. My suspicion shifted from, was he involved, to what does he know now? I returned the magpie to its mahogany box, making sure the old loan applications lay exactly as I had found them. My anger was no longer a boiling rage, but a cold, hard stone, a weapon I could wield with calculation. I called Thomas back, relaying the new information. Julian hid the cipher, I told him plainly. Estelle Sarah married David to get close to Julian and to search the house for this magpie. She runs an art gallery as her cover. She is close to recovering her stolen assets. Thomas was silent for a moment. Mrs. Roberts, this goes beyond infidelity. This is grand larceny, potentially a conspiracy. We need to know where Victor fits in. And more urgently, we need to know how Sarah plans to retrieve the magpie. I explained my theory. Sarah wouldn't risk being caught searching the house, especially under my watchful eye. She would orchestrate a moment of chaos or a planned exit, where the search or the theft could be attributed to someone else or covered by a major distraction. A moment of chaos, a planned exit attributed to someone else. I remembered the scene just a few days prior, Sarah's forced refusal of Lily's bracelet, and her quick, panicked movement when I almost saw the tattoo. Thomas, I said, a grim resolve entering my voice. I believe Sarah is planning to leave, and she will find a way to make the theft of the magpie look like an accident or the work of a stranger. She will need a distraction, a goodbye gift, a final family gesture. I needed to anticipate her next move. The perfect American family tableau had always centered around our traditional, massive Sunday dinners, and the grand finale of her perfect performance would likely be played on that stage. I decided to set my own trap. I needed to let Sarah believe she was close to her goal, to draw her out of the shadows and force her to execute her plan prematurely under my control. I started a subtle campaign of suggestion and scarcity around the house. I accidentally left the attic door ajar, letting Sarah see the financial boxes had been disturbed. I mentioned Julian's increasing weariness, his frequent business dinners, which I now knew were likely related to Victor's resurgence, suggesting his memory was failing, a subtle hint that the key might soon be lost. Then I delivered the final trigger. I announced quite casually at dinner one night that I was planning to donate many of Julian's old, dusty possessions to a local historical society, starting with the old papers and that ridiculous wooden bird Julian keeps in the attic. Sarah's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Her eyes, those calm, soft-spoken eyes, widened, and for a fleeting second, the sharp, calculating gaze of Estelle Dubois was clearly visible. "Oh, Mother Cora," she managed, her voice thick with forced composure. "Are you sure? Perhaps we should check with Julian first. Some of those old boxes. They might have sentimental value." "Nonsense, dear," I replied, sipping my tea. "Julian barely remembers what's in there. I'm doing a clear-out. I'll box it up next Sunday right after dinner." The trap was set. Sunday dinner would be the stage for her final act of deception. But this time, I would not be the perfect, unsuspecting mother-in-law. This time, I was the unseen director of her humiliation. Sunday arrived, thick with the aroma of my famous roast lamb and the subtle, chilling tension I alone felt. The house was full. David, our two grandchildren, Julian and Sarah. It was the picture of familial bliss, the meticulously crafted lie one final time, before I shattered it. Sarah, the master of deception, was in her element. She fussed over the mashed potatoes, complimented my gravy, and kept a watchful, almost predatory eye on Julian. Julian was distracted. He was nervous, glancing frequently towards the attic door. The announcement I had made about the donation, the public declaration that the magpie cipher would soon be gone, had worked perfectly. It had forced Sarah's hand, accelerating her plan. I, too, was prepared. Earlier that morning, under the guise of baking a new batch of dinner rolls, I had entered the attic. I located the magpie, not to hide it, but to move it. I placed the small, heavy wooden bird inside Julian's old, heavy leather wallet, the one he always carried but rarely opened, nestled inside his jacket, which was hanging securely on the coat rack downstairs, visible to Sarah and me. I knew Sarah wouldn't risk going up to the attic during dinner, but she would certainly target Julian's person once the distraction began. Dinner commenced with forced cheer. Sarah proposed a toast to the most wonderful family and to my generosity for donating the old things. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. They were sharp, calculating, confirming my theory. The theft was going to happen tonight. The distraction came, not during dinner, but immediately after. Sarah stood up, a delicate porcelain plate of my homemade lemon meringue pie in her hands. "Mother Cora," she said sweetly, "this pie is absolutely heavenly. You must be exhausted. Let me do the dishes tonight. A final thank you before the holiday season truly ends." "That's very kind, dear," I replied, my voice steady, watching her every move. As she stacked plates, I noticed her hands unusually exposed. No bracelets, no long sleeves. She was wearing a simple silver band around her wrist, strategically positioned to cover the small, faded tattoo. She needed her hands to be free, unobtrusive for the stealthy act she was about to perform. Then Sarah made her move. She accidentally dropped a full glass of red wine onto the immaculate Persian rug near the coat rack. Not on the wooden floor, where it could be easily wiped, but on the expensive rug, ensuring maximum chaos and distraction. "Oh no!" she cried, her voice high-pitched and panicked. "I am so terribly sorry. I'll clean it up right away." David and Julian immediately rushed to help, grabbing napkins and towels. "It's all right, Sarah, don't worry," David said, pulling at the soaked rug. Chaos, distraction, the perfect cover. Sarah, however, did not grab a napkin. She bent low, ostensibly trying to reach the deepest stain, but her hands moved swiftly, silently towards the coat rack. I watched, my heart pounding a frantic, guilty beat, as her fingers deftly slipped into Julian's jacket pocket. She located the wallet and, with a subtle, practiced motion, the motion of a woman skilled in larceny, pulled it out, extracted the magpie cipher, and slipped the wallet back into the pocket. The entire operation lasted less than 3 seconds. The virtuoso of lies had claimed her prize. She stood up, the magpie now concealed securely in the cuff of her blouse. "I think that's all I can do," she said, her chest rising and falling quickly. "I need some air." "Go ahead, dear," I said calmly, rising from my chair. "But before you do, Sarah, Estelle Dubois." The name hit her like a physical blow. The color drained instantly from her face, leaving her as pale as the pie plate. Her perfectly composed facade crumbled. The innocent, sweet smile vanished, replaced by the sharp, desperate gaze of a predator caught in the trap. David and Julian froze, the wine-soaked napkins dangling uselessly from their hands. David stared at his wife, confusion slowly morphing into dawning horror. "What did you say, Mother?" David asked, his voice shaking. I walked towards the center of the room, my eyes fixed on Sarah, Estelle Dubois. I said, "Before you go, Estelle, I want to talk about the decoy magpie and the 20 years of lies you've been living in my house." The moment the name Estelle Dubois left my lips, the air in the room turned thick and toxic. David stared at Sarah, then at me, his face a roadmap of confusion, slowly turning into disbelief. Julian, however, was pale, his eyes wide and panicked, confirming my worst suspicion. He knew more than he let on. "Estelle?" David whispered, his voice broken. "Mother, what are you talking about?" "This is Sarah, my wife." I ignored him, my gaze locked on Sarah. The silver band on her wrist, hiding the tattoo, glistened under the kitchen light. She was trembling, but the old core of the art syndicate operative was fighting back, trying to regain control. "Don't call me that, Cora," Sarah hissed, the sweet tinkling sound of her voice gone, replaced by a sharp foreign edge. "You don't know anything. You're just an old woman seeing things." "An old woman who knows the difference between a wife and a master of deception, Estelle," I countered, moving closer. "The same old woman who knows that 20 years ago, Estelle Dubois was a minor associate in Victor's syndicate, which vanished with several priceless, non-indictable pieces of art, the art you are here to retrieve." I turned to David, who looked as though he was about to collapse onto the wine-soaked Persian rug. "David, that little wooden magpie Julian kept hidden in the attic, the one she just risked stealing. It's the cipher, the key to an offshore lockbox. Your perfect wife married you and wormed her way into this family for 20 years to get her hands on it." As if on cue, Sarah's hand shot up to her blouse cuff, attempting to ensure the magpie was still concealed. The quick, guilty movement was all the visual confirmation David and Julian needed. "The magpie!" Julian gasped, his voice raspy. He stumbled forward, reaching for my hand. "Cora, I never told anyone about it. I was keeping it safe for the bank." "Stop lying, Julian," I snapped, pulling my hand back. "You weren't keeping it safe. You were the discreet banker who helped stash Victor's assets 25 years ago. And your punishment, your karma, was that the woman you helped betray found her way back into your life, right into your son's arms, under a sweet smile and a fake name." Julian shrank back, his face a mask of guilt and fear. He was not just a victim of a cheating wife, he was an accomplice in an old crime, now caught in the crossfire of his past. "Sarah, Estelle, seeing her 20-year plan crumble, lost all pretense. Her body language shifted from elegant art dealer to cornered predator. Fine, she spat, her eyes blazing with fury. But you can't prove anything about the art. It's all speculation, Cora, and your son is still going to leave you for me. David's face snapped up, his jaw clenched, his eyes blazing with a pain that was difficult to witness. The depth of the betrayal, not just of a spouse, but of an identity, a shared history, had finally broken through his denial. David, Estelle pleaded, her voice regaining a desperate false tenderness. It doesn't change anything. We have the children. It was a mistake I made 20 years ago. I love you. But David didn't look at her. He looked at me, his mother, the only steady figure in this spectacular collapse of his life. No, Estelle. David said, his voice terrifyingly calm. A mistake is dropping the wine. This was a lie built on my life, and I want you out of my house. Now. I then played my final devastating card. I pulled out a plain manila envelope I had discreetly placed on the counter earlier. Not divorce papers, but Thomas's full, meticulously organized report. Before you leave, Estelle, I said, placing the envelope in David's stunned hands, you should know that Thomas and I have been watching you. Everything. Your contact with Victor's firm over the last year. The unusual art acquisitions in your gallery. Your plan was not just about the magpie, but to cash out and vanish. And David, I said, my voice softening slightly, turning to my son, Julian and I may be a mess, but we are your foundation. The choice is yours, my son. The truth always leaves a trail. The fight was over. The perfect tableau was shattered. The silent, suffocating quiet was replaced by the cold, hard sound of a final, irrevocable truth. The silence that followed my final declaration was the most deafening I had ever experienced. It was the sound of a family unit fracturing. Estelle Sarah stood frozen, the tiny, incriminating bulge of the magpie in her blouse cuff suddenly feeling heavier than any lie she had told. Julian, my husband, sat at the dinner table, head bowed, the shame of his 25-year-old secret finally exposed. David, my son, was the anchor I was fighting for. He held Thomas's manila envelope, his hands trembling violently. He didn't look at Estelle, nor at his father. He looked at the floor, processing the spectacular collapse of his reality. His wife, his father, his entire adult life, all built on a foundation of calculated deception. Estelle, David finally said, his voice stripped of all emotion, a cold, hard sound. Show me your hand. She hesitated, her eyes darting between him and the door, searching for an escape. Julian whimpered, David, son, please. Show me the tattoo, Estelle. The mark of the syndicate, David repeated, his tone brooking no argument. With a defeated sigh that sounded more like a growl, she slowly pushed up the silver band and the sleeve. The small, faded black design, the insignia of Victor's art syndicate, was starkly visible on her pale wrist. It was the final, undeniable piece of the puzzle. David didn't need to read Thomas's report. The tattoo, the hidden mark I had spotted days ago, was all the truth he needed. He tossed the manila envelope onto the table. Get out of my house, Estelle, and you are never to come near my children again. I'll call my lawyer tomorrow. You don't get the gallery, you don't get the house, you don't get anything you plotted for, and you certainly don't get the magpie. Estelle, seeing her grand plan fail, her 20 years of patience wasted, finally snapped. She tore the small wooden bird from her cuff and threw it at David, missing him by inches. It doesn't matter, she screamed, the predator fully unleashed. Victor will find it. He'll find you. You think you're safe? You're not. You're just a naive fool, David. She snatched her purse and jacket and stormed out of the house. The front door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the perfect shattered dining room, leaving only the three of us in the wreckage. I walked over and picked up the wooden magpie. I turned to my son, David, who was now sitting, head in hands, beside his broken father. Julian, I said, placing the magpie on the table before him. The truth, now. What is this cipher for? Julian lifted his head, his eyes red and full of regret. It's a decoy, Cora. It's a key. Victor and his associates used it to hide a sequence of codes in plain sight. They didn't stash art, Cora. They laundered and hid the proof of their political donations that bought them immunity before the crash. This magpie is the key to an offshore account containing evidence that could send some very powerful people to jail. I was forced to hold it for them. If this evidence ever comes out, it could shatter half of the state's government. The secret was deeper, darker, and more dangerous than simple grand larceny. My family hadn't been fighting over art, we had been holding the key to a political conspiracy. I looked at Julian, seeing the scared young banker from San Diego trapped by a criminal syndicate. And I looked at David, my brave son who had just chosen his mother and his children over a 20-year lie. We go to Thomas. First thing tomorrow morning, Julian, I said, picking up the magpie and placing it not in my purse, but safely in David's hand. This is no longer your secret. It's our family's burden. And David, you make the choice. What do we do with this key? David looked down at the wooden magpie in his palm, the fate of powerful men resting in his hand. He looked up at me, his gaze firm, and the terrified expression was gone. We call Thomas, Mother, David said, his voice steel. And we expose the whole damn thing. It's time for justice, Cora, the kind that doesn't just happen at our dinner table. The following morning was not marked by the usual gentle clatter of breakfast dishes, but by the quiet, heavy resolve of a family preparing for war. David, Julian, and I sat in the living room, the wooden magpie, the innocent Christmas gift that uncovered a 20-year lie, resting on the coffee table. It no longer represented a treasure hunt for art, but the key to a political conspiracy. David, holding the full manila envelope of Thomas's reports, looked older but stronger. The shock was replaced by a sense of righteous anger. Julian, my husband, was a shattered man, weeping silently, begging for my forgiveness. Cora, he whispered, his voice broken. I was only a young man, a bank clerk. They threatened everything. I hid the magpie here, in plain sight, because I knew they would never look for a political cipher in a family home. Your mistake, Julian, I said, my voice steady, was not hiding the magpie. It was hiding Estelle Dubois in your son's life for 20 years. We called Thomas, the private investigator, and arranged a discreet meeting with a high-level investigative journalist Thomas trusted, a true advocate for justice, not just a headline chaser. Thomas arrived not just with reports, but with legal counsel and a former FBI colleague. This was no longer a family drama. It was a matter of national importance. David, my son, made the final decisive move. He presented the wooden magpie to the legal team. This is the cipher, he stated, his voice steel. My father will provide the details on how to decode it and access the political evidence. We want all of it exposed. The exposé was swift and devastating. The key opened a digital lockbox, revealing meticulously kept records of large, illegal political contributions, proof of corrupt immunity and financial laundering that dated back decades. Julian, my husband, became the central witness, a broken man forced to dismantle the secrets of his youth to save his family's honor. The arrests started within 48 hours. First, the old syndicate leader, Victor, apprehended at a private airstrip attempting to flee the country. Then, several high-ranking political figures, the very people who Estelle was plotting to protect or cash out with. And Sarah, Estelle Dubois, she was arrested at the high-end art gallery she had used as her 20-year cover. The irony was not lost on me. The angel was taken away in handcuffs, her perfectly manicured hands finally exposed for the crime they had committed. The community, the art world, and the public were stunned by the intricate, calculated nature of her long-term plot. The divorce was immediate and uncontested. David retained full custody of the children and the family home. He had sacrificed his marriage, but he had saved his soul. The new silence that descended upon the old house was profound, heavy, and yet completely honest. The oppressive quiet of deception was replaced by the solemn quiet of healing. I stood in David's kitchen a week later, helping him pack up all traces of Estelle, the silk ribbons, the fancy serving dishes, the things she had brought into our perfect false tableau. David found the clay bracelet little Lily had made for her mother. He held the lumpy, imperfect clay dog, its mismatched eyes staring up at him. She hated this mother, he said, a faint, sad smile on his lips. She hated anything that was real or clumsy or uncontrolled. That's because she was a beautifully crafted lie, David, I replied gently. And now we start over with the real, clumsy, beautiful truth. I looked at Julian, who was now living in a small, quiet annex of the house, waiting for the legal proceedings. He had paid a terrible price for his past mistake, but he was finally free of the syndicate's shadow. He had given up his liberty to save his sons and mine. The political scandal Julian exposed was vast and far-reaching, rocking the state government for months. Julian, now stripped of his secrets, was a man rebuilding his own foundation. He was no longer the quiet, aloof man obsessed with preserving old things. He was a humble man seeking redemption. He spent his days working in the bakery, not in the old financial district, but with the familiar scent of yeast and flour that had been the constant soothing presence throughout my life. I kept the bakery. My financial independence was secured and stronger than ever, supported now by the whole neighborhood who called me a strong woman. The scent of freshly baked flan and cinnamon rolls was no longer a hollow comfort, but the sweet smell of honest labor and self-reliance. My son David was my pillar. He had lost the woman he loved, the mother of his children, but he gained the most valuable thing, the truth and a clear path forward. He often sat with me at the kitchen table, no longer talking about legal briefs, but about the silly, clumsy clay dog Lily had made. She hated anything that was real or uncontrolled, Mother, he repeated one evening, a sad realization in his voice. And that little dog was the most real thing in our house. Then let it be the first piece of your new life, David, I replied. Julian and Estelle were legally separated, the consequences of their actions stark and final. Estelle was facing charges related to the syndicate, her fate sealed by the very magpie she coveted. Julian's honesty about his past meant he avoided jail time, but he chose to live his life out of the spotlight, helping me in the annex apartment. Life, like my freshly baked bread, was imperfect, but finally real. The house was no longer silent with the heavy, suffocating quiet of a lie. It was filled with the honest, sometimes loud sound of my grandchildren growing up. Then came the next Christmas. I wasn't sure if we could bear the weight of a holiday, not after the spectacular collapse of our perfect family tableau. But David insisted. We need to reclaim it, Mother, he said. For Lily and little Max, we reclaim the joy. This time, the holiday lights didn't feel like tinsel covering up a dark past story. They felt like genuine points of light illuminating a scarred but healing family. On Christmas morning, David handed me a gift. It was a thick, handwritten journal. I want you to write your story in here, Mother, he said, his eyes filled with love and respect. Your story of strength, the real one. I opened the journal, tears welling up. On the first page, David had carefully taped the clumsy clay dog, the symbol of the imperfect true beginning. I looked around the table, Julian humbled but present, David strong and true, and my two grandchildren, the beautiful future. The truth was painful, yes, but it was also the lifeline that saved us. I picked up a pen, ready to write the first line of my new true story, the story of Cora, the woman who was finally free from the silence and the lies, a woman who discovered that a family built on the clumsy truth is infinitely stronger than one built on the most meticulously crafted lie. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in her place? Join Aunt Cora's Porch every evening for another story that'll stay with you long after it ends.